This video is about solving using square roots. So we're going to take the square root of both sides once we get x squared by itself. So in number one, we already have x squared by itself, so we can take the square root of both sides. Remember, when you take the square root, you want a plus or minus sign because you're including two answers for x. So we have x equals plus or minus the square root of 36. 36 is a perfect square, so we get x equals plus or minus 6, and our root is gone. In number two, the x squared is not by itself yet, so we need to solve for x squared. So we're going to subtract 20 from both sides. So we get x squared equals 40. Then we can take the square root of both sides. X equals plus or minus the square root of 40. 40 is not a perfect square, so we're going to have to use our factor tree to break it down. So two numbers that multiply to 40 are 4 and 10. Two numbers that multiply to 4 are 2 and 2. Two numbers that multiply to 10 are 2 and 5. So we have x equals plus or minus. We have a pair of 2's that goes out front. Left over, we have a 2 and a 5, which multiplies to 10. In number 3, to get the x squared by itself, we're going to add 98 to both sides. So we get 2x squared equals 98. Then we can divide by 2 on both sides. So we get x squared equals 49. We take our square root. X equals plus or minus the square root of 49. And then the square root of 49, because that's a perfect square, is 7. So we have plus or minus 7. Now we're going to get into some more complicated problems, where instead of having an x squared, we're going to have a parentheses squared. So we're first going to do like we did before. We're going to take the square root, but then it's going to involve an extra step. So when we take the square root of both sides, we have x plus 7 equals plus or minus the square root of 81. Well, the square root of 81 is 9, so we have x plus 7 equals plus or minus 9. Now we want to get the x by itself still, so we're going to subtract 7 from both sides. So we get x equals negative 7 plus or minus 9. So that's going to give us two answers. We're going to have negative 7 plus 9, which means that x is going to equal 2, and we're going to have negative 7 minus 9, which means x is going to equal negative 16. So we're still going to have two answers, but now instead of a plus or minus, they might be different numbers because we're actually going to evaluate them. In number 5, when we take the square root of both sides, we get x minus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 25. So x minus 3 equals plus or minus 5 because 25 is a perfect square. Then we're going to add 3 to both sides. So x equals, we're going to put the number that's without the plus or minus first. So 3 plus or minus 5. Then we're going to get our two answers for x. So x equals 3 plus 5, which is 8. Or 3 minus 5, which is negative 2. So in number 6, when we take the square root of both sides, we get x plus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 18. Now 18 is not a perfect square, so we're going to have to break that down. So 18 breaks down to 9 and 2, 3 and 3. So we have x plus 2 equals plus or minus, we have a pair of 3's and a 2 left over. Now this is a little bit of an easier problem because when we subtract 2 from both sides, we can't combine the 2 and the 3 root 2 because one has a root and one does not. So we're just going to write our answer as negative 2 plus or minus the square root 3 root 2. In number 7, when we take the square root of both sides, we get x minus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 60. We don't know the square root of 60, so we're going to break that down into 6 and 10. 6 breaks to 3 and 2. 10 breaks to 2 and 5. So we have x minus 2 equals plus or minus. We have a pair of 2's, and we have a 3 and 5 left over, which gets us root 15. So we're going to add 2 to both sides. So again, just like in number 6, we're going to write our answer as an expression. We're not going to have a full number, so we're going to have 2 plus or minus 2 root 15. Now, in some other problems where it gets a little more complicated, before we can take the square root, just like when we had the x squared, we need to move the number away first so that the squared is the only thing on that side. So what we're going to do first is we are going to subtract 8 on both sides. So we get x minus 2 squared is equal to 44. Now we can take the square root of both sides. So x minus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 44. So we're going to have to break down 44. So we get 4 and 11. 4 breaks to 2 and 2. So x minus 2 equals plus or minus, we have a pair of 2's and an 11 left over. So 2 root 11. We're going to add 2 to both sides. So x equals 2 plus or minus 2 root 11. So in number 9, we're going to add 18 to both sides. So we get x plus 2 squared is equal to negative 12. When we take the square root of both sides, we get x plus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of negative 12. Remember that we cannot take the square root of a negative number, so this is going to be a no real solution. In number 9, there's a number in front of the parenthesis. So just like if there was a number in front of the x squared, the first thing we're going to do is divide. So we're going to divide by 2 on both sides. So we get x minus 5 squared is equal to 4. Then we can take the square root of both sides. So x minus 5 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 40. 40 breaks down to 4 and 10. 4 breaks to 2 and 2. 10 breaks to 2 and 5. So we have a pair of 2's. And we have a 2 and a 5 left over to get us 10. Then we can add 5 to both sides. So x equals 5 plus or minus 2 root 10. In number 11, to get the x squared by itself, first we're going to subtract 9 from both sides. So we get x plus 7 squared equals 36. When we take the square root of both sides, we get x plus 7 equals plus or minus the square root of 36. 36 is a perfect square, so we get x plus 7 equals plus or minus 6. We can subtract 7 from both sides, so x equals negative 7 plus or minus 6. Because there's no square root involved, we can get our 2x answers by splitting this. So we have negative 7 plus 6, which gets us negative 1. And we have negative 7 minus 6, which gets us negative 13. So now let's put this all together. So we need to get the x plus 1 squared by itself. So first thing we're going to do is subtract 20 from both sides. So we get 2 times x plus 1 squared is equal to 40. We can divide by 2 on both sides. So x plus 1 squared is equal to 20. We're going to take the square root. So x plus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 20. We can break down the square root of 20. So we have 2 and 10, 2 and 5. So we have x plus 1 equals plus or minus, we have a pair of 2's with a 5 left over, so 2 root 5. We're going to subtract 1 from both sides, so x equals negative 1 plus or minus 2 root 5. So in number 13, in order to solve, the first thing that we are going to do is move that 30 over by adding it to both sides. So 4 times x plus 7 squared equals 256. Then we can divide both sides by 4. So we get x plus 7 squared is equal to 64. Take the square root of both sides. X plus 7 equals plus or minus the square root of 64. The square root of 64 is 8. So x plus 7 equals plus or minus 8. We can subtract 7 from both sides. So x equals negative 7 plus or minus 8. So we're going to split that into 2 to get our x values. So x equals negative 7 plus 8, which is 1, and negative 7 minus 8, which is negative 15. Starting tomorrow, we're going to start talking about quadratic formulas. So we're going to do a quick preview of skills for tomorrow. So the first part, we're going to evaluate b squared minus 4ac given the values of a, b, and c. So all we're going to do here is substitute our values. So for a, we're going to put in 7. For b, we're going to put in negative 8. And for c, we're going to put in 1. Now, when you substitute, make sure you put parentheses around this. So as we substitute here, we would get negative 8 squared minus 4 times 7 times 1. Then, instead of doing this by hand, all we need to do is type this into our calculator. So then we're going to go to our calculator and type that in. Make sure we use our parentheses. So parenthesis negative 8 squared minus 4 parenthesis 7 parenthesis 1, and we get 36. So in number 2, for B, we're going to have 5. So 5 squared minus 4. A is negative 12, so parenthesis negative 12, and C is 2, so parenthesis 2. Then we're going to type that into our calculator. So we have parenthesis 5, even though it's a positive number, we're still going to put parentheses around it, minus 4 times negative 12, parenthesis 2, and this time we get 121. The second part of a skill that you'll need with a calculator is simplifying a radical expression. So what's going to happen here is you're going to get two answers because of this plus or minus. So we are going to have 3 plus the square root of 8 divided by 5, and we're going to have 3 minus the square root of 8 divided by 5. So we're going to do this twice in our calculator. So first we're going to do 3 plus the square root of 8. We're going to do this in 2 steps. So we're going to do the numerator first, hit enter, and then divide by the denominator. Now, because these are decimals, we're going to round to the nearest hundredth, which is 2 decimal places. So looking at the 5 after the 6, we're going to round up to 1.17. Then we're going to have 3 minus the square root of 8 divided by 5, and that's going to round to 0.03. So in number 2, we have 4 plus the square root of 25 divided by 3. We have negative 4 minus the square root of 25 divided by 3. So in our calculator, we're going to do this twice. So first we're going to do our numerator, negative 4 plus the square root of 25, hit enter, divided by 3, gets us 0.33. And then we have negative 4 minus the square root of 25, divided by 3, and we get negative 3.